Atenism, or the Amarna heresy, refers to the religious changes associated with the 18th dynasty Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, better known under his adopted name, Akhenaten. In the 14th century BC, Atenism was Egypt's state religion for around 20 years, before subsequent rulers returned to the traditional gods and the pharaohs associated with Atenism were erased from Egyptian records. History of the Aten before Akhenaten. The Athena the god of Atenism first appears in texts dating to the 12th dynasty, in the story of Sinu. Here during the Middle Kingdom, the Aten as the sun disk was merely one aspect of the sun god Re. The Aten, hence, was a relatively obscure sun god. Without the Atenist period, it would barely have figured in Egyptian history. Although there are indications that the Aten was becoming slightly more important in the 18th dynasty period, notably Amenhotep III's naming of his royal barge as Spirit of the Athena. It was Amenhotep IV who introduced the Atenist revolution, in a series of steps culminating in the official installment of the Aten as Egypt's sole god. Although each line of kings prior to the reign of Akhenaten had previously adopted one deity as the royal patron and supreme state god, there had never been an attempt to exclude other deities, and the multitude of gods had been tolerated and worshipped at all times. During the reign of Thutmose IV it was identified as a distinct solar god, and his son Amenhotep III established and promoted a separate cult for the Aten. There is no evidence however that Amenhotep III neglected the other gods or attempted to promote the Aten as an exclusive deity. Atenist revolution. Amenhotep IV initially introduced Atenism in year 5 of his reign, raising the Aten to the status of supreme god, after initially permitting the continued worship of the traditional gods. To emphasize the change, Aten's name was written in the cartouche form normally reserved for pharaohs, an innovation of Atenism. This religious reformation appears to coincide with the proclamation of a said festival, a sort of royal jubilee intended to reinforce the pharaoh's divine powers of kingship. Traditionally held in the 30th year of the pharaoh's reign, this possibly was a festival in honor of Amenhotep III, whom some Egyptologists think had a coregency with his son Amenhotep IV of 2 to 12 years. Year 5 is believed to mark the beginning of Amenhotep IV's construction of a new capital, Akhenaten, at the site known today as Amarna. Evidence of this appears on 3 of the boundary stelae used to mark the boundaries of this new capital. At this time, Amenhotep IV officially changed his name to Akhenaten as evidence of his new worship. The date given for the event has been estimated to fall around January 2 of that year. In year 7 of his reign the capital was moved from Thebes to Akhenaten, though construction of the city seems to have continued for 2 more years. In shifting his court from the traditional ceremonial centers, Akhenaten was signaling a dramatic transformation in the focus of religious and political power. The move separated the pharaoh and his court from the influence of the priesthood and from the traditional centers of worship, but his decree had deeper religious significance too. Taken in conjunction with his name change, it is possible that the move to Amarna was also meant as a signal of Akhenaten's symbolic death and rebirth. It may also have coincided with the death of his father and the end of the coregency. In addition to constructing a new capital in honor of Aten, Akhenaten also oversaw the construction of some of the most massive temple complexes in ancient Egypt, including one at Karnak and one at Thebes, close to the old Temple of Amun. In year 9, Akhenaten strengthened the Atenist regime, declaring the Aten to be not merely the supreme god, but the only god, a universal deity, and forbidding worship of all others, including the veneration of idols, even privately in people's homes. An arena the Egyptian state had previously not touched in religious terms. Aten was addressed by Akhenaten in prayers, such as the great hymn to the Aten, O sole God beside whom there is none. Dominic Montserrat wrote that the Egyptian people were to worship Akhenaten while only Akhenaten and Nefertiti could worship Aten. Akhenaten staged the ritual regicide of the old supreme god Amun, and ordered the defacing of Amun's temples throughout Egypt, and of all the old gods. The word for gods was prescribed, and inscriptions have been found in which even the hieroglyph of the word for mother has been excised and rewritten in alphabetic signs, because it had the same sound in ancient Egyptian as the sound of name of the Theban goddess Mut. Aten's name is also written differently after year 9, to emphasize the radicalism of the new regime. No longer is the Aten written using the symbol of a rayed solar disk, but instead it is spelled phonetically. Contrast with traditional Egyptian religion, Akhenaten carried out a radical program of religious reform which, for a period of about 20 years, largely supplanted the age-old beliefs and practices of the Egyptian state religion, and deposed its religious hierarchy, headed by the powerful priesthood of Amenhotep IV. For 15 centuries the Egyptians had worshipped an extended family of gods and goddesses, each of which had its own elaborate system of priests, temples, shrines and rituals. A key feature of these cults was the veneration of images and statues of the gods, which were worshipped in the dark confines of the temples. The pinnacle of this religious hierarchy was the pharaoh, who was both king and living god, and the administration of the Egyptian kingdom was thus inextricably bound up with, and largely controlled by, the power and influence of the priests and scribes. Akhenaten's reforms cut away both the philosophical and economic bases of priestly power, abolishing the cults of all other deities, and with them the large and lucrative industry of sacrifices and tributes that the priests controlled. At the same time, this strengthened the role of the pharaoh. Dominic Montserrat, analyzing the various versions of the hymns to the Aten, argues that all the versions of the hymns focus on the king and suggests that the real innovation is to redefine the relationship of God and king in a way that benefited Akhenaten, quoting the statement of Egyptologist John Baines that Amarna religion was a religion of God and king, or even of king first and then God. Initially, Akhenaten presented Aten to the Egyptian people as a variant of the familiar supreme deity Amun-Ra, in an attempt to put his ideas in a familiar religious context. Aten is the name given to the solar disk, whereas the full title of Akhenaten's god was Ra Horus, who rejoices in the horizon in his name of the light which is in the sun disk. However, in the 9th year of his reign Akhenaten declared a more radical version of his new religion by declaring Aten not merely the supreme god, but the only god, and that he, Akhenaten, as the son of Aten was the only intermediary between the Aten and his people. He even staged the ritual regicide of Amun, and ordered the defacing of Amun's temples throughout Egypt. Key features of Atenism included a ban on idols and other images of the Aten, with the exception of a rayed solar disk, in which the rays appear to represent the unseen spirit of Aten. New temples were constructed, in which the Aten was worshipped in the open sunlight, rather than in dark temple enclosures, as the old gods had been. Although idols were banned even in people's Hermes these were typically replaced by functionally equivalent representations of Akhenaten and his family venerating the Aten, and receiving the Ankh from him. The radicalization of year may 9th be due to a determination on the part of Akhenaten to dispel a probable misconception among the common people that Aten was really a type of sun god like Ra. Instead, the idea was reinforced that such representations were representations above all of concepts of Aten's universal presence not of physical beings or things. Amarna art. Styles of art that flourished during this short period are markedly different from other Egyptian art, bearing a variety of affectations, from elongated heads to protruding stomachs, exaggerated ugliness and the beauty of Nefertiti. Significantly, and for the only time in the history of Egyptian royal art, Akhenaten's family was depicted in a decidedly naturalistic manner, and they are clearly shown displaying affection for each other. Greek influence may have resulted in some of the Amarna artistic characteristics. Images of Akhenaten and Nefertiti usually depict the Aten prominently above that pair, with the hands of the Aten closest to each offering ankhs. Unusually for New Kingdom art, the pharaoh and his great royal wife are depicted as approximately equal in size, which together with Nefertiti's image used to decorate the lesser Aten temple at Amarna may suggest she also had a prominent official role in Aten worship. Artistic representations of Akhenaten usually give him an unusual appearance, with slender limbs, a protruding belly and white hips. Other leading figures of the Amarna period, both royal and otherwise, are also shown with some of these features, suggesting a possible religious connotation, especially as some sources suggest that private representations of Akhenaten, as opposed to official art, show him as quite normal. It is also suggested by Bob Breyer, in his book The Murder of Tutankhamun, that the family suffered from Marfan's syndrome, which is known to cause elongated features, and that this may explain Akhenaten's appearance. Decline of Atenism. Crucial evidence about the latter stages of Akhenaten's reign was furnished by discovery of the so-called Amarna letters. Believed to have been thrown away by scribes after being transferred to papyrus, the letters comprise a priceless cache of incoming clay message tablets sent from imperial outposts and foreign allies. The letters suggest that Akhenaten was obsessed with his new religion, and that his neglect of matters of state was causing disorder across the massive Egyptian empire. The governors and kings of subject domains wrote to beg for gold, and also complained of being snubbed and cheated. Also discovered were reports that a major plague pandemic was spreading across the ancient Near East. This pandemic appears to have claimed the life of Akhenaten's main wife and several of his 6 daughters, which may have contributed to a declining interest on the part of Akhenaten in governing effectively. With Akhenaten's death, the Aten cult he had founded almost immediately fell out of favor due to pressures from the priesthood of Amun. Tutankhaten, who succeeded him at age 8, changed his name to Tutankhamun in year 3 of his reign and abandoned Akhenaten, the city falling into ruin. Temples Akhenaten had built, including the temple at Thebes, were disassembled, reused as a source of building materials and decorations for their own temples, and inscriptions to Aten defaced. Finally, Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Tutankhamun, and I were removed from the official lists of pharaohs, which instead reported that Amenhotep III was immediately succeeded by Hormuzd. Link to Judaism. Because of the possible monotheistic character of Atenism, a link to Judaism has been suggested by various writers. For example, psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud assumed Akhenaten to be the pioneer of monotheistic religion and Moses as Akhenaten's follower in his book Moses and Monotheism. The Egyptian author Ahmed Usman went as far as to claim that Moses and Akhenaten were the same person. Atenism in fiction and popular culture. Finnish author Mika Waltari used the idea of Aten and Atenism in his famous historical novel The Egyptian. So did New Zealand-Canadian author Pauline Jedge in her 1984 historical novel The 12th Transforming. Son of the Sun, a song by the symphonic metal band Therion, is critical of Atenism and monotheism. Literature. Aldred, Cyril, Akhenaten, King of Egypt ISBN 0-500-05048-1, Makthos, Negub, Akhenaten, Dweller in Truth ISBN 0-385-49909-4, Redford, Donald B., Akhenaten, The Heretic King ISBN 0-691-00217-7, Reeves, Nicholas, Akhenaten, Egypt's False Prophet ISBN 0-500-28552-7, Procopia, Angelos, Pharaoh Akhenaten Theat. Play First ed. 1961 Athens. ISBN 960-7327-66-7. See also, Judaism and Ancient Egyptian Religion, Solar Deity. References, Rosalie David, Handbook to Life in Ancient Egypt, Facts on File Incorporated, 1998. Pages 124, Rosalie David, Opsit, pages 124, Rosalie David, Opsit, pages 125, Hart, George. The Routledge Dictionary of Egyptian Gods and Goddesses. Routledge. Pages 39. ISBN 978-0-415-34495-1. Montserrat, Dominic. Akhenaten, History, Fantasy and Ancient Egypt. Routledge. Pages 40. ISBN 978-0415301862. John Baines. The Dawn of the Amarna Age. In David O'Connor, Eric Klein. Amenhotep III, Perspectives on His Reign. University of Michigan Press. Pages 281. Reeves, Nicholas, Akhenaten, Egypt's False Prophet ISBN 0-500-28552-7, pg 146.